ॐ अज्ञानतिमिरन्दस्य ज्ञानाञ्जनाशलाकाय चक्षुरुन्मिलितं येन तस्मै श्रीगुरवे नमः। श्रीचैतन्यमनोभीष्टं स्थापितं येन भूतले स्वयं रूप कदा मह्यं ददाति स्वपदान्तिकं। वन्देऽहं श्रीगुरून् श्रीयुतपदकमलं श्रीगुरून् वैष्णवांश्च श्रीरूपं साग्रजातां सहगण रघुनाथान्वितं तं सजीवं साद्वैतं सार्वधूतं परिजनासहितं कृष्णचैतन्यदेवं श्रीराधा कृष्णपदान् सहगण ललिता श्रीविशाखान्वितांश्च नमो विष्णुपदाय कृष्णपृष्ठाय भूतले श्रीमते भक्तिवेदांत स्वामिनिति नामिने। नमस्ते सरस्वते देवे गौरवाणी प्रचारिणे निर्विशेष शून्यवादी पाश्चात देश तारिणे। हे कृष्णा करुणा सिंधु दीनबंधो जगतपते गोपेश गोपिका कांत राधा कांत नमोस्तुते। तप्त कांचन गौरांगी राधे वृंदावनेश्वरी वृषभानुसुते देवी प्रणमामि हरिप्रिये। वाञ्छाकल्पतरुभ्यश्च कृपा सिन्धून एव च पतितानं पावनेभ्यो वैष्णवेभ्यो नमो नमः। श्रीकृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर श्रीवासादि गौर भक्तवृंद। हरे कृष्णा 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे हरे. So after a very wonderful Ram Navami and Hanuman Jayanti week, we are again resuming back our Bhagavad Gita classes. Let me just share with you the screen. So we had completed till shloka number, second chapter, shloka number 11. We're moving on to shloka number 12. So I have just muted everybody. Do not unmute yourselves at all. And on unmute only, you can just recite the shloka, okay? Natve Natvevaha jatu nasam Natvam neme janadipa Na chev na bhavishyama Sarve vayamata param Natvevaha jatu nasam न त्वं नेमे जनाधिपाः न चैन भविष्यामः सर्वे वयमतः परम्. Translation. Never was there a time when I did not exist, nor you, nor all these kings, nor in the future shall any of us cease to be. So what I'm planning to do is today is I'll be taking the 12th and the 13th text as well. I'll be explaining both these texts, and then maybe in the next week I will be taking the 14th. 14 is very important. It needs an elaborate explanation. So that's why I did not take the 14th this time. So, purport. In the Vedas, in the Katha Upanishad, as well as in the Shvetashvara Upanishad, it is said that the Supreme Personality of Godhead is the maintainer of innumerable living entities in terms of their different situations according to individual work and reaction of work. The Supreme Personality of Godhead is also by his plenary portions alive in the heart of every living entity. Only saintly persons who can see within and without the Supreme Lord can actually attain to perfect and eternal peace. Nityo nityanam chetanas chetananam eko bahunam yo vidadhati kaman tam atmastham ye anupashyanti dhiras tesham shanti shashvati netresham. The same Vedic truth given to Arjuna is given to all persons in the world who pose themselves as very learned, but factually have but a poor fund of knowledge. The Lord clearly the Lord says clearly that He Himself, Arjuna, and all the kings who are assembled on the battlefield are eternally individual living beings, and that the Lord is eternally the maintainer of all the living entities, both in their condition and in their liberated situations. The personality of Godhead is the supreme individual person, and Arjuna, the Lord's eternal associate, and all the kings assembled there are individual eternal persons. It is not that they did not exist as individuals in the past, and it is not that they will not remain eternal persons. The individuality existed in the past, and the individuality will continue in the future without interruption. Therefore, there is no cause for lamentation for anyone. The Mayavadi theory that after liberation, the individual soul, separated by the covering of Maya or illusion, will merge into the impersonal Brahman and lose its individual existence is not supported herein by Lord Shri Krishna, the supreme authority. Nor is the theory that we only think of individuality in the conditioned state supported herein. Krishna clearly says herein that in the future also the individuality of the Lord and others, as it is confirmed in the Upanishads, will continue eternally. This statement of Krishna's is authoritative because Krishna cannot be subject to illusion. If individuality were not a fact, then Krishna would have not stressed it so much, even for the future. The Mayavadi may argue that the individuality spoken of by Krishna is not spiritual, but material. Even accepting the argument that the individuality is material, then how can one distinguish Krishna's individuality? Krishna affirms his individuality in the past and confirms his individuality in the future also. He has confirmed his individuality in many ways. An impersonal Brahman has been declared to be subordinate to him. Krishna has maintained spiritual individuality all along. If he is accepted as an ordinary conditioned soul in individual consciousness, then his Bhagavad Gita has no value as authoritative scripture. A common man with a common man with all the four defects of human frailty is unable to teach that which is worth hearing. The Gita is above literature. No mundane book compares with the Bhagavad Gita. When one accepts Krishna as an ordinary man, the Gita loses all importance. The Mayavadi argues that the plurality mentioned in this verse is conventional and that it refers to the body. But previous to this verse, such a bodily conception is already condemned. After condemning the bodily conception of the living entities, how was it possible for Krishna to place a conventional proposition on the body again? Therefore, individuality is maintained on spiritual grounds and is thus confirmed by great acharyas like Sri Ramanuja and others. It is clearly mentioned in many places in the Gita that this spiritual individuality is understood by those who are devotees of the Lord. Those who are envious of Krishna as the supreme personality of Godhead have no bona fide access to the great literature. The non devotee's approach to the teachings of the Gita is something like that of a bee licking a bottle of honey. One cannot have a taste of honey unless one opens the bottle. Similarly, the mysticism of the Bhagavad Gita can be understood only by devotees, and no one else can taste it. As it is stated in the fourth chapter of the book, nor can the Gita be touched by persons who envy the very existence of the Lord. Therefore, the Mayavadi explanation of the Gita is a most misleading presentation of the whole truth. Lord Chaitanya has forbidden us to read commentations made by the Mayavadis and warns that one who takes to such an understanding of the Mayavadi philosophy loses all power to understand the real mystery of the Gita. If individuality refers to the empirical universe, then there is no need of teaching by the Lord. The plurality of the individual soul and the Lord is an eternal fact, and it is confirmed by the Vedas as above mentioned. So I'll be explaining this purport, but let's see the 13th one. So you all can again repeat after me. Dehinosmin yatha dehe. So this is a very important shloka. If you all want, you all can by heart this shloka also. Dehino asmin yatha dehe. Kamaram yavanam jara. Tatha dehantaram praptir. Dhirastatra namuyati. Dehinosmin yatha dehe. Kamaram yavanam jara. Tatha dehantaran praptir. Dhirastatra namuyati. As the embodied soul continuously passes in this body from boyhood to youth to old age, the soul similarly passes into another body at death. A sober person is not bewildered by such a change. Since every living entity is an individual soul, each is changing his body every moment, manifesting sometimes as a child, sometimes as a youth, and sometimes as an old man. Yet the same spirit soul is there and does not undergo any change. This individual soul finally changes the body at death and transmigrates to another body. And since it is sure to have another body in the next birth, either material or spiritual, there was no cause for lamentation by Arjuna on account of death, neither for Bhishma nor Drona, for whom he was so much concerned. Rather, he should rejoice for their changing bodies from old to new ones, thereby regenerating their energy. Such changes of body account for varieties of enjoyment or suffering according to one's work in life. So, Bhishma and Drona, being noble souls, were surely going to have spiritual bodies in the next life, or at least life in heavenly bodies for superior enjoyment for material existence. So, in either case, there was no cause for lamentation. Any man who has perfect knowledge of the constitution of the individual soul, the super soul and nature, both material and spiritual, is called a dhira or a most sober man. Such a man is never deluded by the change of bodies. The Mayavadi theory of oneness of the spirit soul cannot be entertained on the ground that the spirit soul cannot be cut into pieces as a fragmental portion. Such cutting into different individual souls would make the supreme cleavable or changeable against the principle of the supreme souls being unchangeable. As confirmed in the Gita, the fragmental portions of the supreme exist eternally, sanatana. Sanatan means eternal, and are called kshara. That is, they have a tendency to fall down into the material nature. These fragmental portions are eternally, and so even after liberation, the individual remains the same fragmental. But once liberated, he lives in eternal life in bliss and knowledge with the personality of Godhead. The theory of reflection can be applied to the super soul who is present in each and every individual body and is known as Paramatma. He is different from the individual living entity. When the sky is reflected in water, the reflections represent both the sun and the moon and the stars also. The stars can be compared to the living entities and the sun and the moon to the Supreme Lord. The individual fragmental spirit soul is represented by Arjuna, and the Supreme Soul is the personality of Godhead Sri Krishna. They are not on the same level, as it will be apparent in the beginning of the fourth chapter. If Arjuna is on the same level with Krishna, and Krishna is superior to Arjuna, then the relationship of instructor and instructed becomes meaningless. Both of them are deluded by the illusionary energy Maya. Then there is no need of being the instructor and the instructed. Such instruction would be useless because in the clutches of Maya, no one can be authoritative instructor. Under the circumstances, it is admitted that Lord Krishna is the Supreme Lord, superior in position to the living entity. Arjuna, who is a forgetful soul, deluded by Maya. So, this is a very wonderful shloka. I'll be explaining these two shlokas. Give me just a minute. So, what we had done is, if you see that this is in this particular shloka, where this shloka is actually, this shloka takes us to the previous argument that Arjuna had done. If you remember, in the first chapter, 28 shloka, Arjuna was presenting his first argument that on the basis of compassion, right, that he did not want to fight. And if you see all those signs of compassion that were there, were his limbs were trembling, his mouth was drying, his whole body was shivering, his hair standing on his hands, his skin was drying up, his legs were trembling, and his gandiva bow was slipping. So he was not able to stand any longer due to impatience. So now, Prabhupada in that particular purport was mentioning that there, the causes of compassion from different viewpoints. So one compassion of Arjuna was actually due to his soft-heartedness as a pure devotee. So he was, where in the Bhagavad Gita, Bhagavatam itself is saying that these are the qualities of a Vaishnava. It says that Yasyati bhaktir bhagavati akinchana sarver gunas tatra samasate sura harava bhaktasya kuto mahadguna manorathena sati dhavato bhihi. He says over there that all the demigods that are there, and they have that exalted qualities, and they have qualities such as religion, knowledge, renunciation. So all these wonderful qualities will manifest in a particular person who has developed unalloyed devotion for the Supreme Lord. So he says yasyati bhakti bhagavati akinchana, without any, akinchana means without any ulterior motive. And when a particular person does such bhakti to the Supreme Lord without any motive, uh, over there he's saying that uh, anybody who's doing this particular bhakti without any motive, then he will be, he has all the good qualities of the Supreme Lord. So, and on the other hand, somebody who does not have bhakti or devotional service to the Supreme Lord, he is always engaged in many material activities. And then such a person will not have good qualities. So only a person who has developed bhakti or devotional service to the Supreme Lord will have all the good qualities of the Supreme Lord. So even if a person is adopting, mystic yoga, or if he has, he's maintaining his family relative, and or he has some mental speculations, and such person, he is engaged in the service of the external energy of the Lord. The external energy of the Lord is called Maya or Mahamaya. The internal energy of the Supreme Lord is called Yoga Maya. So that is why there can be no good qualities with such a person who's too much engrossed into material life. And in that purport, Prabhupada says that, again, actually, Prabhupada makes a connection in that same purport where he quotes the 15th, from the 15th chapter, 7th verse he quotes. He says that Mame Vansho Jiva Loke Jiva Bhuta Sanatana Mana Shashta Indriyani Prakriti Sthani Karshati. He says that all these living entities, they are my part and parcel, they are eternal fragmental part and parcel. And because they are into a conditioned state, they all are struggling with their six senses, and which is, the mind is also included in Mana Shashta Indriyani. And where Krishna is saying that Krishna, they, all the living entities are my part and parcel, and uh, and because the living entities are his part and parcel, uh, uh, they also possess all the good qualities that Krishna has, but in small quantity. So when one is engaged in the ninefold path of devotional service, where it starts with Shravanam, Kirtanam, Vishnu, Smaranam, Pada Sevanam, Archanam, Vandanam, Dasyam, Sakhya, Atma Nivedanam. So when a particular person is, in the nine processes of devotional service, then his heart becomes very much purified, and he can understand that, okay, I have a permanent relation with the Supreme Lord, and then he is reviving his dormant relationship with the Supreme Lord. And in that particular shloka, in the Bhagavatam, it is said that all these wonderful qualities of a Vaishnava are mentioned. And specifically, Prabhupada gives the example of Srila Haridas Thakur, where Haridas Thakur was very magnanimous, he was very peaceful, he was very grave, he was very tolerant, well behaved, and he spoke also very pleasing and sweet words to the devotees. He was always respectful to every devotee, and he was working for everyone's benefit also. Plus, he was not even a duplicit person. He was completely free from malice. And so these all qualities are originally, Krishna also has these qualities. So, and when one becomes a devotee, then that particular person also will have the same qualities. And Srila Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami also, he says that in a Vaishnava also, many of these wonderful qualities will manifest, and you will be able to, differentiate between a Vaishnava and a non-Vaishnava. And then Krishnaraj Kaviraj Goswami lists those 26 qualities from that particular shloka. So when we say that, you have compassion due to soft-heartedness, so that soft-heartedness a pure devotee will always have. And when you have, you have compassion, then that heart has unflinching faith for the Supreme Lord. And whereas a person who is not a devotee yet, he may be very much advanced in education or culture, but he will lack all these godly qualities, and he will be only hovering on the mental plane, and every time he will be attracted by the external energy or the glaring energy of the Supreme Lord, which is Maya. So, Arjuna's soft heartedness or compassionate is actually for both the parties. But his compassion is a false compassion, and that compassion is arising due to fear. And what fear he has? That, okay, all these my relatives will lose their lives. So, this particular thing is indicating the material conception of life, this false conception. So, Arjuna was very impatient, and his impatience was actually uh, because He did not want to, see his relatives die. And due to this only impatience, Arjuna said that I do not want to, fight on this battlefield. And because of impatience, mind also become very weak. He was forgetting in himself that who am I? I'm a Kshatriya. I'm supposed to fight. I'm supposed to, kill the opponent person. But because of weakness of his mind, he was forgetting himself also. And because too much of when a person has too much of attachment to material things, then these attachments put a person into bewilderment, or in a bewildered state of mind. So uh, Arjuna is trembling also. So there are two types of trembling. One is the material trembling and one is the spiritual trembling. Like for example, in spiritual life, what happens is that out of great spiritual ecstasy, people tremble also, they faint also, they laugh also. But when you have a great fear under material condition, then that time also you tremble. Like for example, somebody has lost lots of money in gambling, so he starts trembling. Now what will happen? So that trembling is due to material fear. And he had fear also. So what was that cause of his fear? So his fear was भयं द्वितीय अभिनिवेशतात् सयात् दिशाबपेत्यस्य विपर्ययत स्मृति तन्मायया तो बुध अभजितः भक्तेष्क गुरुदेव आत्मा. So he had bhayam dvitiya abhiniveshatah. So he had bhay and dvitiya, which is, something which is not the Supreme Lord, other than the Supreme Lord. And because he was too much absorbed in that thing, so he had bhay. And this fear arises when a particular person, he will misidentify himself with this material body, and he will be too much absorbed in his external energy. So when this living entity, he turns away from the Lord, then he forgets his constitutional relationship with the Supreme Lord, that the Supreme Lord is his master and the living entity is the servant. And the living entity is the part and parcel of the Supreme Lord, and he's supposed to serve the whole because he is the part of the Supreme Lord. So this particular bewildering, fearful condition is because of the influence of Maya. And therefore, any person who's an intelligent person, he should have unflinching, and a ading, ekdam firm faith in devotional service of the Lord. And what kind of devotional service then it should be? Then it should be unalloyed. Unalloyed means there should be no selfishness. There should be no motive in that particular devotional service, that okay, I'll do some devotional service and the Supreme Lord will give me some wealth and some more other facilities and all. No. And such unalloyed service should be done only in the guidance of the Supreme, of the spiritual master. So the particular person should accept that the spiritual master as his worshipable deity and his very life and soul, that all his instructions are my life and soul. So Srila Sridhar Swami Maharaj, in that particular purport to this 11th canto, second chapter, he's saying that there might be an objection that, okay, fear is caused by ignorance, but this can be dispelled by even knowledge. And then there is no need to worship the Supreme Lord. If I get knowledge, then all my ignorance is gone. And this particular Jivatma that is there, he is falsely identifying himself with this material body, that okay, this is my family and this is my wife and this is my children and so on. And you know, he just has to give up this false identification. Then Maya will not be able to do anything. So then again, to this argument, Srila Sridhar Swami is actually saying that no, he's saying that Devi hi esha gunamai mama maya duratyaya mameva ya prapadyante maya metam tarantite. He says that the Supreme Lord's divine energy that is there, which has three modes of material nature, is very difficult to overcome. Devi hi esha gunamayi. Gunamayi means three gunas it is consisting of. But he's saying mameva prapadyante. Those who are surrendered in to me, then maya metam tarantite, they can very easily cross this ocean. So this particular jiva that is there, and the jiva, when he's understanding his original constitutional position, that okay, I am a tatastha shakti or marginal shakti, and I am a very minute person or I am a very minute living entity, and I am always eternally dependent upon the supreme living entity who is Krishna. So then there will be no problem. Where, again, the Vedic literature says that Nityo Nityanam Chetanas Chetanam Eko Bahunam Vidhati Kaman. So he's saying that among all the eternally conscious beings, there is only one supreme eternal living being who is supplying the needs of all the other many uh, Eko Bahunam Yo Vidhati Kaman, the needs of many other innumerable living entities. And even Kathopanishad is also saying that Ekala Ishvara Krishna Arasa Britya. Ekala means only one. So only Krishna is Ishvara. Ishvara also what? Param Ishvara. Arasaba. Others all are Britya. Britya means servants. So Krishna is the only independent controller, and all the others are dependent on him. Like I always give this example of the finger, right? The finger is a part and parcel, and this must be engaged in the service of the Lord, right? Or the hand is the part and parcel of this whole body. If the hand does not cooperate, then we won't be able to lift any particular article. So, for example, if I want to lift an apple, then I cannot lift it with one finger. I cannot even lift it with two fingers. I have to actually take all those five fingers and lift that particular apple. So, what means what? There is a coordination between all these five fingers of the hand, which is a fingers of the hand, which is a part of the hand. Similarly, this hand is a part of the body. And if this hand stops cooperating for eating, then again there is a strike. The food will not reach the stomach, and the person will fall ill, weak, or sick, and or even may die. So whenever the Lord's whenever somebody wants to serve the Supreme Lord, then the potency of the Lord that is enlightening us in the Lord's service is the Lord's Chitta Shakti. And when this living entity is developing, the spirit of independence, that time he is forced to come into this material world. And then there are, a series of fearful situations awaiting him. And then the Bahiranga Shakti of the Supreme Lord. So there are two Shaktis of the Supreme Lord. One is the Antaranga Shakti, means the internal potency. And one is the Bahiranga Shakti. Bahir means outside, external. The external Shakti, or the illusionary potency of the Supreme Lord, which is covering all, that trance of the Chitta Shakti. And it is actually imposing one's material body one after another into some sinful enjoyment. So this living entity, he keeps on having different relationships, birth after birth, birth after birth, and he loses all that power to perceive his eternal, relationship with the Supreme Lord. And that Supreme Lord is his actual shelter. But instead of becoming attached to the Supreme Lord, then he becomes attached to many, many temporary, forms or illusionary forms in this material world, like family members, friends, city, nation, and cars or bungalows. And, he's put into this state of ignorance. So that is why ignorance is the prime cause, and this ignorance is only actually giving you when you fear. So the fear is caused by ignorance. So ignorance can be cut by the sword of knowledge only. But interestingly, if you see that Prabhupada says in that particular purport, he says that we should not be disturbed by these temporary changes, because this is the nature of the material world. And if you're just seeing what are the causes of misfortune, then you will get only pain and you'll be frustrated, and you'll be only expecting from people. You'll have no happiness. So you will be just not in a happy state, and if you're not in a happy state, then you'll be lamenting. So with that little synopsis of what was there in the first chapter, now Krishna is refuting this argument in shloka number 12 and 13, where Krishna says that, okay, individuality is never lost. All the living entities are eternal, and they continue their individuality in the future without any interruption. So Arjuna, why are you lamenting for death of your loved ones? So then Arjuna may argue that, okay, change of body is still a cause of lamentation, that he's changing. But then again Krishna is refuting. He says, okay, change of body is a very natural, as somebody is just changing clothes. If somebody is changing old clothes to new clothes, he does not lament. So change of body is very natural, as one is changing from boyhood to youth to old age. So if from my childhood, if I have actually gone to my youth age, I do not cry, oh, I was a child and now I am a young person. No. So this natural change, nobody will lament for. And then Arjuna might say that, just give me a minute. Arjuna might argue that, okay, but we lament for the loss of, youth. When a particular person becomes old, then he's lamenting, oh, I become old. My young age was so nice. So Krishna again is saying that, okay, even if, Bhishma and Drona, they have gone old, but yet they will get fresh bodies, and which can be, in the heavenly planets, or it can be in some spiritual body also. Then why are you lamenting for a new body that, Bhishma and Drona are going to get? So even in that example, I remember that King Yayati also, he traded his old age and got a very fresh, youthful body. That was the cause of his rejoicing. So, but then, Arjuna may again think that, okay, but attachment to this current body of relatives will be still the cause of my lamentation of losing them. I'm very attached to them. I'm very attached to their good qualities. And that's where Krishna is actually advising that, okay, you have no choice, but you have no choice other than to tolerate the loss of your loved ones, because these are all non-permanent dualities and they are arising only from sense perception. So Krishna is saying that, see, they are moving from one body to another, from an they're changing, an old body to a new body. This is a cause of lamentation, but you need to tolerate. You just tolerate, they are, what do you say? You tolerate the changing of their bodies. So then, in this 12th shloka, where Prabhupada is stressing on the purport, in the purport, is stressing that, see, we all are eternal individuals, and therefore there is no cause of lamentation. शोक करने की कोई जरूरत नहीं है when you're changing a body. For example, एक बूढ़ा व्यक्ति है, वो मर जाता है, लेकिन वो उस शरीर में बहुत ही कठिनाई भोग रहा था. So isn't not it better that in that old age he was suffering in that body, and now after death he is getting a fresh new body where he can not suffer the onslaughts of old age, or he is not suffering out of weak eyesight or wrinkled face or white hair, or he is even barely able to even walk. Isn't that a better situation? That sometimes you see, I have experienced this so many times, because in my family I've seen a series of death of old people, right from my grandmom to my grandfathers to my grand uncles and great grand, uh, you know fourth generation also have seen death. So but at that point of time, of course, we lament for their good qualities that they have left us, with such a rich heritage, or a rich samskaras, and we won't be able to again get their realizations or their experiences, what they have experienced in life. But at the same time, uh, we were even more satisfied that, yes, my grandfather was suffering very much heavily, and at least he's out of his suffering, or my grandmother was suffering very much heavily at the age of 87, and at least she's got relief from that suffering. So there was no cause of lamentation for that changing body. In fact, we were happy that she was into a suffering body, and now she'll be into a better body in her next birth. So so then if you see the focus point, that in this 12th shloka, is that our individuality is eternal, and the Supreme Lord, who is the maintainer of all the living entities, how is he maintaining? He is maintaining in terms of different situations according to our individual work and the reaction to that particular work. So he has his plenary portion also, and as the Paramatma in the living entity's heart, and he is alive also in the heart of all the living entities. So the saintly people who have a vision of this, and who have achieved this vision, that okay, the Supreme Lord is there and the Supreme Lord is always with me, and who have this particular vision of eternal individuality, then they will always have eternal peace, and they will be perfect also. They can see the same Supreme Lord inside also and outside also, within also and without also. So Prabhupada very strongly refutes the Mayavad theory. Mayavad theory, what it is? Mayavad theory, it says that this individual soul is actually separated or broken from that original consciousness by covering of Maya. And the Mayavadi theory says that Mayavadi theory says that that individuality exists only in the Mayavadi may argue that okay, Individuality exists only in the conditioned state. But Krishna is clearly saying that no, individuality of the Lord and the living entities are in the present tense also, and in the future tense also, and in the past tense also. It was never lost. But then again, the Mayavadis always argue that okay, individuality is material and not spiritual. Then, so then again, Krishna has to refute that no. How can one distinguish Krishna's individuality? Krishna confirms his individuality in the past also and in the future also. So, if Krishna is an ordinary conditioned soul who has 4 defects, then this Bhagavad Gita will lose all its value. Because who can actually speak that I am the Supreme Lord, who is actually in that particular position, who possesses all the 6 opulences, who has 64 qualities? That particular person can claim that I am Bhagavan. And the Mayavadis always keep on arguing that okay, plurality in this particular verse is referring to only, the body. But Prabhupada is refuting in this purport. He's saying that the bodily conception that is condemned in 2.11, then the Lord will place a conventional proposition on the body again then. So, if individuality refers to the empirical universe, then there is no need only of teaching the teachings of the Bhagavad Gita by the Lord. So, who can understand all these complications? Only a devotee of the Supreme Lord can understand the Bhagavad Gita. So, in the very beginning, in the very first class, also I had told that at least theoretically we should believe, or theoretically we should agree that Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And who cannot understand the Lord then? Those who are envious of the Supreme Lord, then those people cannot understand the Supreme Lord. And that is why Prabhupada time and again keeps on refuting Mayavadi philosophies. So, so in a nutshell, to just understand, this individuality, that मैं एक individual जीवा हूँ. I am an individual जीवा. I'll put it in English and Hindi for the understanding of both the parties, those who know English and those who know Hindi. तो मैं एक एक स्वतंत्र जीव हूँ, इंडिविजुअल जीव हूँ, एंड मैं कृष्ण का अंश हूँ. आई एम द पार्ट एंड पार्सल ऑफ द सुप्रीम लॉर्ड. तो मेरा जो अस्तित्व है, माई दैट एग्जिस्टेंस दैट इज देयर, इट विल बी देयर फॉर एवर. परमानेंट है ये अस्तित्व मेरा. ये नहीं है कि मैं इस धरातल पे आ गया तो मेरा अस्तित्व खो गया, या मैं भगवान से विलग हो गया हूं तो मेरा अस्तित्व खो गया है. No, if I have separated from the Lord, that doesn't mean that I have lost my individuality. If I have separated from the Lord and come to this material world, that doesn't mean that I do not have an existence now, or I am no more a part and parcel of the Supreme Lord. No, I was a part and parcel of the Supreme Lord. I am a part and parcel of the Supreme Lord. And for time immemorial, I will be a part of the Supreme Personality of Godhead or the Supreme Lord. So, my individuality does not diminish or vanish away. My individuality is permanent. I am an individual soul. That position is intact into the spiritual world. And Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. His position is also intact in the spiritual world. So these two, one is the master and one is the servant. So both have their individual identities, and one is the servant or the subordinate of the other, and one is the supreme person. So such things, we should understand at the very onset. Otherwise, you just go into a wrong loop and you might just not understand the teachings of the Bhagavad Gita. So now in 2.13, Prabhupada is saying that he says that Dehunusmin yatha dehe kaumaram yoravandra tatha dehan tatar praptis dhiras tatra na muyati. So when there are changing bodies, a particular person is actually left his old body, going in a new body. A person who is a dhira, a person who is very tolerant, a person who is not disturbed or bewildered by changing bodies, he will not be disturbed at all. So this verse is proving that there is no cause of lamentation. शोक करने की कोई जरूरत ही नहीं है अगर कोई जो बंदा है वो अपनी बॉडी चेंज कर रहा है. If somebody is changing his body, then you don't need to actually lament. So Bhishma and Drona are going to get anyways fresh bodies. And also being noble, they will get spiritual bodies or at least the heavenly bodies, which is a higher elevation, which is guaranteed for them. So Prabhupada says that what is the definition of a dhira? A dhira is a person, one who has perfect knowledge of the constitution of the soul, the super soul, and nature, both material and spiritual. And he is not disturbed by the changing bodies. So, and because he is not disturbed by these changing bodies, then he can tolerate the dualities. Tolerating dualities means whether in happiness or in distress, he does not get bewildered, he does not get disturbed when he knows how to tolerate. So, again, Prabhupada in this also shloka, he is refuting Mayavadis a lot because this theory of oneness of spirit soul cannot be entertained. See, spirit soul cannot be cut into pieces. Okay, it is not that, okay, I cut the spirit soul into pieces and make some fragmental portions. So now Prabhupada is actually mentioning what is our philosophy in this particular purport. He says that the spirit soul is an eternal fragment. It cannot be cut, and if it could be cut, then that would make the supreme, cleavable against the principle of the supreme souls being unchangeable. And this spirit soul, which is fallible, fallible means it falls from the spiritual world. But Krishna is infallible. Krishna does not fall down from his superior position as the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So he is all the time he is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Even if he comes on this material world and he's playing the part of a small boy, does not mean that he is now no more a Supreme Lord. No, all these fragmental portions exist eternally, Sanatan. But all these fragmental portions, that the living entities, they are kshara. Kshara means fallible. Fallible means they have a tendency to fall down. And that is why the spirit soul never merges into the supreme soul. So even I had this misconception that the soul merges into the supreme after liberation. No, the soul does not merge into the Supreme Lord even after the liberation of the spirit soul. He will remain a fragmental part and parcel of the Supreme Lord only. तो ये नहीं है कि जीवात्मा, एक मनुष्य की आत्मा भगवान की आत्मा में लीन हो जाता है. This is a very, very big misconception actually, that a particular soul of a human being merges into the soul of the super soul. No, never ever this happens. Even if the soul gets liberation, he reaches to the lotus feet of the Supreme Lord. This we need to really understand कि वो भगवान का दास था, है और रहेगा. तो जब वो लीन हो जाएगा तो उसका दासत्व तो खत्म ही हो जाएगा ना. लेकिन प्रभुपाद यही कह रहे हैं, प्रभुपाद is saying that he as an eternal servant, that position of the living being does not change. He is the he is the servant of the Supreme Lord. This is a fact, and this fact will never change. So when Prabhupada is even distinguishing also, that how it is, distinguished. Like you have the spirit soul and then you have the super soul. And Prabhupada is giving the theory of reflection. Just give me a minute. So this theory of reflection can be applied to the super soul. So super soul is what? He's present in all the living entities. Okay, in every individual body he is available. And he is known as the Paramatma. And he is different from that individual living entity also. It's not like that, that because the Paramatma is into the living entity, now both the Paramatma and Atma have become one. No. The Paramatma is a different, has its own stand. The living entity has its own stand, and both are in one body only. The Paramatma actually accompanies a living entity 24/7. Even when a living entity is leaving one body and entering into another body, that time also the Paramatma is accompanying him. So, with every individual living entity, one Paramatma is definitely accompanying him. And that is why Krishna always says, Surit Sarva Bhutanam. I am the Surit, I am the ever well wishing friend of all the living entities. So, he is different from the individual living being, the Supreme Lord. Now, when the sky is reflected in water, the reflections present both the sun also, and the moon also, and the stars also. So the stars are compared to the living entities, and the sun and the moon are compared to the Supreme Lord. So all these individual, these fragmental, spirit soul is represented by Arjuna. And the super soul is actually Lord Sri Krishna himself. So the soul is never equal to the super soul. आत्मा परमात्मा के बराबरी कभी नहीं कर सकती है. The super soul is never, the soul is never equal to the super soul. So this theory of reflection, it is actually establishing this. And if the soul and the super soul are equal, you know, if they are equal position of the instructor and the instructed, then it holds no value. अगर both को एक level पे लेके जाएंगे, then it will lose its value. Then that is why Lord Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Arjuna is a living entity who is forgotten, who is like the forgotten soul, and now he is actually deluded by Maya. Maya के वशीभूत हो गया है. So this is the explanation of these two shlokas. If anybody has any queries, questions, doubts, I'm very sorry. This was a very heavy philosophical class, but right on set it was very important to establish this thing. Otherwise, what happens? Many times people say Bhagwan mein leen ho gaye, and the Jivatma has lost its individuality. So this was very important to explain. So I rest my speech over here. If anybody has any doubts, questions, comments, reflections, or if you have not understood some part of the class, you can ask me. Oh, everybody understood everything. I have unmuted everybody. Anybody wants to ask, you can ask. Okay, so if you all have no questions, thank you so much for your active participation and your patient hearing. Thank you very much. Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Gaur Bhakta Vrind ki jai, Hare Krishna. So we'll be having a reading class at 9:15, okay?